Hi, I am Adéle McLeod and I will be telling you more about managing Phytophthora in macadamia. I apologize that my schedule could not allow me to visit you in person, but I hope that we can do so in future. Phytophthora cinnamomi is the most well-known soil-borne pathogen of macadamia, but I just want to point out that within this group of all my seeds that Phytophthora belong to, because they produce swimming spores, there's also another pathogen that our research program recently confirmed information by Cobus in 2007 that it's also a pathogen of macadamia and that it causes root rot and stem canker. So we have ongoing research projects to also determine if the management practices that will be effective against Phytophthora will be effective against Phytopythium vexans. We are hoping so. Therefore, since there are not much information available on the management of Phytopythium species on macadamia, my focus will be on Phytophthora management for the remainder of the talk. On macadamia, Phytophthora causes two symptoms, namely root rot and stem cankers, that ultimately results in yield reductions. As you can see on this slide, from the left to the right, you see a deterioration in feeder roots, which is caused by Phytophthora because it mainly infects the feeder roots and destroys these roots. The destruction of feeder roots by Phytophthora cinnamomi ultimately leads to a decline in canopy health, with the canopy thinning because there are no feeder roots or very limited feeder roots to take up nutrients and water. And you can see even on a tree on the left-hand side that seems to have a reasonable canopy, there are very few feeder roots. And I'll come back to this, but the amount of feeder roots will ultimately also decide which approach you are going to use when applying chemicals to manage the disease. This slide just shows more photos of canopy decline caused by Phytophthora, which, as I mentioned, is due to destruction of the feeder roots. However, some of the symptoms can also be due to the other symptom caused by Phytophthora, which is stem canker, as you can see on the encircled tree on this slide. Stem cankers are initiated when a wound occurs on the stem, followed up by splashing of soil containing Phytophthora spores that will infect through the wound. So initially the lesion develops as a crack, as you can see on the photos on the left-hand side, which then as it ages develops into a dry stem canker crack, as you can see on the photo on the right-hand side. This slide shows the internal damage caused by stem cankers. As you can see in these cross sections, there are necrotic spots, and this is most likely a host response of the macadamia tree in response to Phytophthora cinnamomi infection. This is because cinnamomi initially, when infecting, requires living host cells. So the macadamia tree will cause death of its own cells to stop infection by the pathogen, which in this case, as you can see, was actually effective, but unfortunately that destruction of the host cells causes a reduction in increase in stem diameter. So you can clearly see on both cross sections, in areas where you don't see necrosis, the tree was effectively expanding in diameter, trunk diameter, which ultimately the limitation of expansion in trunk diameter and tree growth will affect yield. Management of Phytophthora should include an integrated management strategy, as is illustrated here by the peg wheel that is very well known in the avocado industry. So first of all, soil management is important. So when establishing an orchard, make sure that the drainage is good. And then secondly, ridging also helps with managing the disease, especially if you are on a heavy soil. And this is because Phytophthora loves waterlogged soils, and the disease will be more severe if soils get waterlogged. Second aspect of an integrated management strategy is the planting material. So make sure to use Phytophthora-free planting material by purchasing from certified nurseries. And then the second aspect, where possible, try and plant less susceptible varieties or rootstock. So currently, from a research side, we've just started looking at this, but I'm sure you, from own experience, know which rootstocks and cultivars are more susceptible to Phytophthora. What our results thus far has shown is that A16, for instance, is very susceptible to Phytophthora. So although it's not commonly used as a rootstock, as a scion, it will tend to be more susceptible to stem cankers than the other cultivars such as Beaumont. In an integrated management strategy, it's also important to take note of irrigation management practices that can influence the disease, as well as organic amendments. So for irrigation, it's important, if you are using micro sprinklers, to place these away from the crown, because prolonged wetting of the crown and stem area will increase the likelihood of stem infections by Phytophthora. Don't over irrigate, because it favors the asexual development of the pathogen and infections. And also don't under irrigate, because as all diseases, Phytophthora will be more prevalent if trees are stressed. And then I know the last one for irrigation is mostly not practical, but try and micromanage diseased trees, because the smaller diseased trees will use less water. So the soil at these trees will get more wet and saturated, and that favors Phytophthora. So the conditions for disease development on these trees then just starts increasing. And I think this is also important when replanting smaller trees into an older orchard. Then for organic amendments, applying compost and mulch not only improves soil aeration, it increases microbial activity, and it also yields a buffering against abiotic stress, which can altogether reduce the conditions favorable for development of disease. It is important that fertilization of the trees should be optimum according to soil and leaf nutrient analysis. And in addition to this, calcium applied either as gypsum or calcium nitrate is used, especially in the avocado industry in Australia, being applied at 0.5 tons per hectare. However, be careful that too much calcium can replace potassium and magnesium. So always, if you do want to use calcium applications in an integrated management strategy, consult with a soil scientist, so that you, in the long run, don't run into problems with potassium and magnesium. So the mode of action of calcium against Phytophthora is very interesting. First of all, with long-term application, it improves soil aeration, and therefore it reduces waterlogging in soil, which will favor Phytophthora. And then it also has a mild fungicidal activity against Phytophthora, specific the spore type Sporangia, and then it can also induce host plant resistance. So the mode of action here isn't pH, but it's rather direct fungicidal activity, host-induced resistance, and also improving soil aeration. Before starting to talk about chemical control, I just want to remind again that it's very important to use an integrated management strategy for controlling Phytophthora. For instance, in Australia and the macadamia industry, organic amendments are used widely, but I do realize that there are some limitations and problems with using this, but definitely that, along with irrigation management, calcium applications, good root health, soil management, and using clean planting material, is very important to combine with chemical control. Okay, the earlier chemical control is started, the more effective it will be, because chemical control cannot be and will not be effective once severe symptoms are evident on the tree, both in trunk cankers as well as a decline in canopy health, and when there is extensive root loss. And furthermore, in most cases, because as I showed you on the pictures, the pathogen will often reduce your feeder root mass, or the damage from stem cankers are extensive. Usually one would need to apply chemical control for at least 2 years before one will be able to see visible improvement in tree health. There are basically two compounds that can be used for managing Phytophthora worldwide on different tree crops. The first is mefenoxam, which has recently been registered on Macadamia, and the second is Phosphonate, which we are currently busy with registration trials in South Africa, but in other countries it is registered for managing Phytophthora on Macadamia. Then there are also a few new actives, oxathiopyrilin and fluopicoline, that has recently been registered in the USA on avocado and citrus, and some work has also been initiated on macadamia in South Africa, but we don't have results yet. The product containing mefenoxam in South Africa that is registered is Ridimol. It's a highly effective product against Phytophthora. It is only translocated in the xylem, so it moves upward in the tree, and therefore the only method of application is a soil application in the root zone. So it is effective because it can also reduce your soil inoculum levels, but very important, when using this product, it cannot be used on moderately to severely diseased trees if the canopy health of that tree is due to a reduction in feeder root systems. So always assess the amount of feeder roots available on trees before deciding to use this product, because if there are no feeder roots, it cannot be taken up by the roots. But in some cases, damage in an orchard might not be as much due to feeder root. It might be due to stem cankers, where Ridimol will then most likely be very effective, because it can be taken up through the roots and then protect the stem from further stem canker infections. Um, One important aspect is to remember is that Ridimol is prone to microbial breakdown as well as resistance development. So therefore, strictly adhere to the recommendations of the label according to the number of applications and the amount of product that can be applied in an orchard. Phosphonates, which I know you are all very familiar with, are translocated in the xylem and the phloem according to a source sink manner. So wherever there is a sink in a tree, for instance with fruit setting or flower, the product will move there. Phosphonates break down into plants into phosphate anions, which are the active compound against Phytophthora. Then there are various different formulations. The first one that came onto market was alkyl phosphonates under the product name Aliet. Then there are various potassium phosphonate formulations. The one that we are looking at for registering is Phosgard. And then there are also ammonium phosphonate under the trade name Brilliant. So the mode of action of phosphonates are very interesting, which is also evident from the FRAC code. So at first the mode of action was said to be unknown, but currently FRAC considers it to be a host plant defense induction product. So this also is likely why there is no reported resistance development against phosphate anions. But in the research arena, there is still a debate as to whether it's really only host plant resistance induction or whether it is more likely to be a combination of host plant defense induction and a direct toxic effect against Phytophthora. Because phosphonates are really a unique active compound in that it can move up and down in the tree in the xylem and phloem, there are various options for applying it, which includes soil applications, foliar sprays, and trunk sprays or paint. However, having said that, there's a lot of controversy about the efficacy of soil application. So currently, it is not a recommended way of applying the product, and there are various reasons for it. But we are still investigating that. So currently, the recommended application methods are foliar sprays and trunk sprays of paint. So for foliar sprays, it's important that there are still enough leaves left on the tree to actively absorb the product. And then similarly, if you do want to apply soil applications with trees that are very diseased and don't have a lot of feeder roots, similar than for ridamil, the phosphonates cannot be taken up by the tree if there are not enough feeder roots. So the biggest challenge currently with phosphonates is the fact that they do cause fruit residues, and this is unpredictable. So it is a problem, and I'll show you some of our data also showing that. Fortunately, the macadamia has a relative high MRL, but still for some supermarkets that have lower MRL requirements, it can be a problem applying these products. It is important that the time of application of phosphonate should be correct, and this should be according to the two root flushes that are more or less in August, September, and the other one in February, March, depending on climatic region as well as cultivar. So these application windows are recommended because of the soil sink translocation. So phosphonate should be applied when the roots are a sink, so during a root flush. We have had a research project investigating when infections of Phytophthora take place on macadamia during the August and September or the February and March. So the data showed that infections occur during both root flush periods. However, there seems to be more extensive colonization of the roots following the February-March application, and this is most likely due to temperatures in the soil being slightly more favorable in February, March, and then also following nut production, the host plant probably becomes more susceptible because of the stress of fruit bearing, and also there's a push of carbohydrates to the soil. So definitely the February-March application window is very important for protecting roots from Phytophthora infection, but also subsequent colonization. I will now briefly share some of our results from our phosphonate registration trials. So this table just shows the different treatments that we included. We investigated the soil drench, a bark spray, and 3 different foliar spray treatments that varied in dosage and the number of applications that were made. All treatment except the last one was applied in autumn and spring according to the root flush of the trees. So we included a 0.4% active ingredient foliar spray, which is a very high concentration. So normally most growers will use the 0.2% active ingredient. We were interested in just seeing what the 0.4% active ingredient would do if you only apply it during the March application window to increase our root phosphate concentrations. But be aware, if you apply phosphonates at this high concentration, it is very important to, after mixing the product in the spray tank, that the pH should be adjusted to 7.2 using potassium hydroxide, otherwise you will get extensive leaf burn. In our trials, we did not observe leaf burn problems with this concentration, and also just keeping in mind to, where possible, not apply foliar sprays when there are excessively high temperatures. We conducted 2 orchard trials for evaluating the different phosphonate treatments. The one trial was in Macadamia that contained more severely declining trees, whereas in the other trial was in Nelspruit, where the trees had a healthier canopy scores than for the Macadamia trial. The 2 graphs shows the amount of Phytophthora that we quantified in the roots. The dark burgundy bars are the first year of quantifications, and you will note that in the Macadamia trial there was no significant reduction by any of the phosphonate treatments of Phytophthora in the roots, whereas in the Nelspruit trial in the first year, 2019, it was only the 2 higher dosage foliar sprays that significantly reduced the pathogen within the first year. However, in the second year, the pathogen was reduced in the roots significantly relative to the untreated control for all the treatments, with there being no significant difference among the treatments. We did quantify yield in the trials, but we could not observe any significant yield differences. There were also no consistent stem cankers present in the orchard, so therefore stem canker severity was not evaluated in the trials. And all over, the root quantification of the pathogen supports the fact that within the first year of applying phosphonates, there is not that much reduction of the pathogen. One needs a second year of application to really start seeing significant control of the pathogen. We also evaluate the efficacy of the treatments in the 2 trials by quantifying phosphide in the roots. So phosphide is the breakdown product of phosphonates that have activity against Phytophthora. So in the Macadamia trial, both the bark spray and the soil drains actually yielded very low root phosphate concentrations, irrespective of the fact that it actually did suppress the pathogen. In the Macadamia trial, this was most likely due to the roots being very few and the orchard being in a more severe state of decline, so there was no or very little uptake of the phosphonates due to a sparse root system. Whereas in the Nelspruit trial, the soil drains did better and was comparable to the foliar spray because the trees did have enough feeder roots to take up the soil drains. In the Macadamia trial, the bark spray didn't do that well in yielding root phosphate, which we are not very sure why that is. But furthermore, the root phosphate quantification showed that in general, as we increase the dosage of the foliar sprays, that the root phosphate increased in the Nelspruit trial. And again, in the Macadamia trial, not that clear that increasing foliar sprays dosages increase the root phosphate, most likely also being due to the canopy being much sparser and not effectively taking up the phosphate. We also quantified phosphatyl aluminium residues in nuts. I know it seems odd to quantify phosphatyl al when we did not apply an alkyl phosphonate but a potassium phosphonate. This is just the way how the EU expresses residues for phosphonates. So there's currently no residue set for phosphonic acid, which is similar than phosphide. So therefore, one has to adhere to the phosphatyl al residue limit. So the 2 graphs shows the residues that we measured in the 2 trials in 2021 and 22. So for some unknown reason in 2021, the residues were very high in the Macadamia trial for the foliar sprays, not so much for the foliar sprays in nail sprays in 2021, whereas in 2022 the residues in general were lower. Again, for unknown reasons, as I previously mentioned, the translocation and storage of phosphate in trees are complex, and we don't understand very well how that occurs. Nonetheless, in both of the years, one can see that the nut residues basically reflected also what we measured in the roots. But specifically beneficial year was that in both years the soil drench and the bulk spray yielded the lowest residues, and therefore the current recommendation is to rather use bulk sprays because it reduces the residues in the nuts compared to foliar sprays. And as I previously mentioned, soil drench applications are still currently under investigations, and we need to confirm that it won't increase the risk of resistance development among the populations in the soil. Because young trees are very susceptible to Phytophthora, it is important to make use of a preventive chemical program with tree establishment and to make sure that the trees do not get infected within the first 3 years. So this program will usually consist of first applying a metalaxyl or mefenoxam soil drench at planting. However, since some cultivars are sensitive to the actives, the label states that it should not be applied at planting, but rather about a month and a half after planting, and then follow-up applications of phosphonates for the first 3 years to make sure that no infections take place. And this is especially important when one plants susceptible rootstocks, and if you know that you are in a soil that will be conducive or the drainage on the site is not good. I would like to thank SAMAC for providing research funding for the Phytophthora work on macadamia, growers for providing the trial sites for our registration trials, and then MC Pretorius and Andrew Shreed for useful discussions on Phytophthora development on trees and its management.